You touch that piano, and I'm calling security. That's how it began, with one broken piano, one disheveled man, and one cruel assumption. But when he sat down and played, the music that emerged silenced an entire mall and cracked open a city's heart. What no one knew was that the man they mocked was Arthur Beaumont, a vanished billionaire grieving a mother the world had forgotten. What followed was not just a performance, but a movement. A place called Eleanor House, built from memory, love, and second chances. This is the story of how one note changed everything. Now, before we dive deeper, please like and subscribe to our channel. We share powerful, meaningful stories like this every day. And drop a comment below to let us know what time and where you're watching from. Thank you so much, and now let's get back to the story. You touch that piano, and I'm calling security. The woman's voice, clipped and laced with disdain, cut through the bustle of the mall like a cold wind. Her heels clacked as she marched across the polished marble, her silk scarf trailing behind her like a banner of authority. She didn't even look at the man she was addressing, just stared at the out-of-order sign taped across the grand piano's lid, as though it were sacred and he a trespasser. The man said nothing. He just stood there, still as a shadow. He was tall, though his hunched posture made him seem smaller. His hoodie, faded and graying at the edges, hung loosely over his frame like something forgotten. He carried no shopping bags, no cell phone, no watch, just a quiet presence and a gaze that lingered too long on that piano. Children's laughter echoed from the carousel near the food court, but it felt miles away. The woman scoffed, curling her lip. Figures. Always one of them wandering in here when the weather turns cold. Security. And with that, she vanished into the crowd, her attention already shifting back to her boutique. He turned toward the piano. It was wedged in a quiet corner between the French pastry stand and an overpriced leather goods store. Years ago, it must have been beautiful. Shiny lacquer, ivory keys kissed by sunlight through the glass ceiling. But now, the bench wobbled. Half the keys were chipped, and the middle panel was duct-taped shut. A crumpled paper cup rested on the lid. It hadn't been touched in months, maybe longer. Still, his hand reached out. The tips of his fingers brushed the wood, lightly, tenderly, like someone revisiting a memory. And just then, "Sir! Excuse me, sir!" Two security guards, barely older than college kids, approached with the usual manufactured authority that came from a badge clipped to polyester. One had a flashlight. The other was chewing gum like it was his job. "Mall rules clearly state that no one is to touch or play this instrument," the gum chewer recited, glancing down at the sign like it might morph into a legal document. "It's broken. Out of order. Management policy." Still, the man said nothing. He looked at them slowly, his eyes soft but unreadable. Then, he sat down. A hush, imperceptible at first, began to settle in the space around him. A young mother with a stroller paused mid-step. An old man sipping soup looked from his newspaper. Somewhere, a toddler dropped a cookie. The man placed his hands on the keys. A pause. Then, click, one note, off key, hollow. A faint chuckle rose from a nearby table. He tried another, this one stuck. Then another. And then, a sound, a fractured chord, fragile, strained, but alive. His fingers moved with hesitation, then resolve. He adjusted his posture, closed his eyes, breathed in deeply, like a man about to dive into cold, deep water. The melody began. It was nothing like what one might expect. No dazzling runs or classical overture, just a lullaby. Wounded, slow, like something once whole that had been broken and put back together with trembling hands. The sound filled the space, not with volume, but with presence. At first, people ignored it. Then, gradually, they didn't. A barista in the nearby coffee stand lowered her milk frother. A child with chocolate on her chin turned from her tablet. A janitor mopping tile steps leaned against his broom and tilted his head. There was something haunting in the way he played, like he was trying to remember something important that had almost been lost forever. The piano fought him. Notes thudded where they should have soared. Keys refused to respond. But he didn't flinch. Instead, he adapted, skipping broken tones, bending the rhythm, wrapping the silence around the song like it was part of the story. It wasn't perfect. It was honest. And then the laughter returned, but not from joy. "He's still going?" A teenager sneered from a bench nearby, his phone out and recording. "Dude, what even is this?" His friend snorted. "Homeless Beethoven. Yo, Post that to TikTok. Still, the man kept playing. The lullaby grew deeper, more aching. It was the kind of melody that made you stop mid-bite, forget your phone, and remember the name of someone you hadn't spoken to in years. It didn't demand attention. It earned it. And slowly, it began to claim the room. A woman in a wheelchair rolled closer. Her eyes shimmered. "My grandmother used to hum that when I had nightmares," she whispered to no one. A teenage boy wearing noise-canceling headphones removed them. His mouth fell open slightly, and he sat down on the tiled floor like a child in church. The guards glanced at one another, unsure now. The gum chewer shifted, suddenly feeling uncomfortable in his skin. "Should we stop him?" The other hesitated. "He's not hurting anyone." But the manager, look around. He did. And what he saw wasn't a security issue. It was a moment. Strangers were gathering, couples holding hands, children sitting crisscrossed, people forgotten by the rush of retail, suddenly drawn together by something unexplainable. The man opened his eyes for a beat. He saw them, all of them, but he didn't stop playing. Somewhere behind the counter of a luxury jewelry store, a young woman watched with her hand on her heart. Her co-workers were still sneering, but she wasn't laughing anymore. There was something familiar in that melody, something that pressed against the ribcage like a memory she hadn't been ready to revisit. And just as the last note rang out, fragile, suspended in the stillness, a voice snapped from across the corridor. "What is going on here?" The manager had returned. Her stilettos stabbed the floor with each step, her lips tight, eyes burning with fury. Behind her, 2 new guards trailed, clearly summoned for backup. "This mall is not a stage for sympathy acts," she snapped. "I don't care if he's playing Mozart's Ghost through a can of beans. Get him out." The tension broke like glass. People began to murmur. A little girl clutched her teddy bear tighter. The janitor stepped forward but hesitated. The pianist stood slowly. He didn't argue, didn't plead. Just closed the lid over the broken keys gently, like saying goodbye to an old friend. And then, a small hand reached out and tugged the manager's coat. It was the child from earlier, the one with the chocolate on her face. "Please don't stop him," she said, her voice trembling. "That music made my mommy smile." The crowd stilled. The manager faltered, if only for a moment. Then her mask returned. "That's very sweet," she said coldly, "but rules exist for a reason." The man turned. This time he spoke. "Sometimes the rules are what break the music." His voice was soft, worn at the edges, but it carried. And in that instant, you could feel something shift. Not just in the mall, but in the space between people. The pianist, unknown and dismissed, had offered them something they didn't know they needed. He'd reminded them of gentler things, forgotten things, the humanity between transactions, the music between silences. And as he stepped away from the piano, the crowd parted, not like he was being pushed out, but like he was leading something forward. They didn't know his name, not yet, but they knew his melody, and they wouldn't forget it. The man's footsteps echoed softly as he walked away from the piano, the crowd parting gently around him like ripples on water. No applause, no fanfare, just a hush that felt sacred, one carved out not by spectacle but by something rarer, sincerity. He didn't glance back, not even once. But those who had witnessed it stood suspended in a strange silence, as if waking from a dream they hadn't known they were dreaming. For a long, weightless moment, no one moved. Then a child clapped, tentative at first, then louder. Others joined, not out of courtesy but reverence. It wasn't celebration, it was recognition. Something sacred had passed through them all. But the moment shattered like frost underfoot when the store manager spun on her heel and barked, "Well, are you going to stand here all day?" Her voice cracked against the hush like lightning through still air. The crowd dispersed slowly, unwilling to obey her rhythm. A few lingered. The old woman in the wheelchair wiped a tear discreetly. A teenager quietly turned off his live stream, too affected to speak. The janitor, mop forgotten, stared at the piano, almost as if it might speak again. And somewhere nearby, behind the gleaming glass window of a boutique, a young woman in an ivory blouse clutched her necklace tightly between her fingers, her chest rising and falling too fast. Her eyes had never left the man. She whispered, "It can't be." She moved to follow. But he was gone. The man had slipped into the seams of the mall, past kiosks and displays, beyond mannequins frozen in half-step, his hood drawn again over his head. People turned as he passed, Not quite sure why he looked familiar, not famous but important, like someone they were supposed to know from somewhere long ago. He moved slowly now, not from age but from weight, like the song had drained something out of him. His hands, which just moments ago had transformed a broken instrument into something near divine, now trembled slightly at his sides. He stopped near a fountain, where a boy tossed in a penny and whispered a wish too softly to hear. The man closed his eyes and listened. Not to the boy, but to the memory the sound awoke. It had been this very spot. 15 years ago, back when the skylight above still glistened from actual sunlight and not the pale glare of LED strips. Back when laughter echoed from the cafe in the atrium and the smell of cinnamon rolls floated through the winter air. Back when she was still alive. He could still see her, his mother, sitting at that very piano, her posture elegant despite the plastic bench, her fingers coaxing joy from keys that didn't deserve her grace. Her music had made strangers weep. And when she smiled, the world softened. He had been late that day, 22 minutes. He had stopped for a business call, promising he'd meet her soon. When he arrived, they had already loaded her into the ambulance. No one had helped her when she collapsed. Staff had assumed she was loitering. She'd cried out for help between songs, and they'd left. When he looked up now at the skylight, the glass blurred. He never forgave himself, nor did he forget. He had vanished afterward, sold the family estate, left the board. He let the tabloids invent their theories, rehab, breakdown, shame. Let the world forget his name, even as his silent investments grew. He no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. His silence became his inheritance. Until this week, until the mall came up for sale. He'd bought it under a shell company, quietly, no ribbon cutting, no headlines, just his signature and a wire transfer the size of most cities. Budgets. A single acquisition, cold, legal, final. But he hadn't come today as a CEO. He came as a son, and for the first time in over a decade he sat at his mother's piano. He had expected to feel closure. Instead, he felt exposed. Behind him, unnoticed, the young woman in the ivory blouse finally caught sight of him near the fountain. Her breath caught. She had seen those eyes before, not in magazines, not on TV, in an old photograph her father kept locked in his drawer. A photo of two young boys on a porch swing, one grinning, the other solemn. The solemn one was him. She approached slowly. "Arthur?" she asked gently. The name, unused by anyone in 15 years, struck the air like the bell of a distant church. He turned. For the first time since the piano stopped, emotion stirred in his face. Recognition, disbelief, sorrow. "Sophia?" she nodded, tears rising. "I thought, after what happened, you left the country. Everyone thought you disappeared." "I did," he said, voice rough. "But some ghosts don't respect borders." Her expression softened, but her eyes remained fierce. "Why come back now?" Arthur looked past her to the piano in the distance, now surrounded by velvet ropes someone had hastily placed around it, as if too sacred or too dangerous to be touched again. "I needed to hear it one more time. Not the song, the sound of belief, of something that mattered." Sophia swallowed hard. "You didn't just hear it, you gave it to everyone. You brought something to life in that mall, Arthur. That wasn't just music." He sighed. "I didn't mean for anyone to notice." Well, they did. They stood in silence for a moment, the fountain behind them whispering water over stone. Children's laughter returned to the background, mingled with the distant scent of churros and the faint squeak of rubber soles on tile. Then Sophia said, almost as if to herself, "They don't know who you are." Arthur's eyes held hers. "Not yet." And in that answer, something unspoken passed between them, equal parts warning and promise. At that very moment, the teenager who had mocked him earlier was seated with a group of friends, replaying the footage he'd recorded. He squinted at the screen, frowning. Something about the man's hands, his posture, seemed out of place. He zoomed in, paused. His friend leaned in. "Wait, is that?" Another whispered. "That's not just some guy. That's Arthur Beaumont, isn't he? He's worth billions. Didn't he vanish?" Within minutes, the video spread. A TikTok with 10,000 views, then 50. Then local news got wind. The comments exploded. "Wait, is this the Arthur Beaumont? That's the old Beaumont Mall, right? Why is a billionaire dressed like a busker? This man's mother died here. This is her piano. Look it up." The crowd that had once walked away with puzzled reverence now returned in waves. This time not just to listen, but to understand. They stood in front of the piano like it was an altar, reading the sign, studying the broken keys. Some wept, some knelt, some simply stood in silence. Arthur did not return to the keys that day. He watched from a distance. The crowd did not know he was there, nor that his heart was breaking and healing all at once. But Sophia stayed beside him. And in her presence, he finally allowed the tears to fall, quietly, without shame. Not because he played a perfect song, but because in a world so used to polished things, he had reminded them that beauty still lived in the broken. The mall had never felt like this before. Not in all its years of polished storefronts, carefully curated background music, and artificial lighting meant to mimic a sun it hadn't seen in decades. There was something different now, an invisible current running through the tiled floors and glass panes, something you couldn't bottle or market. People were talking, whispering, not about sales or new arrivals, but about him. Arthur Beaumont. The name moved like a tremor beneath the surface, beginning in small echoes. First in a salon waiting area where someone recognized his posture from a decades-old Forbes profile, then through a teenage girl's live stream that had captured the full piano performance, trembling hands and all. By the time the sun dipped low enough to cast pink light through the skylights, a local news anchor was standing awkwardly by the velvet-roped piano, microphone in hand, whispering live into the camera. They still didn't have confirmation, just speculation. But speculation was enough to summon heat. And Arthur could feel it. He hadn't expected to be seen. He certainly hadn't expected to be recognized. He was supposed to slip in, play that one final piece, and walk away like a ghost slipping through the living. But ghosts don't go viral. Sophia remained beside him as the afternoon waned into evening. They sat quietly at a bench near the atrium, tucked beneath a faux tree strung with white lights. The distance between them wasn't physical, but cautious, tender, like two people circling the memory of a wound. "You should say something," she said gently. Arthur didn't look at her. He watched the piano instead, now surrounded by a larger crowd, some reverent, some opportunistic. A few teenagers took selfies beside it. One man wept openly and placed a single white rose across the cracked lid. "Words wouldn't help," he murmured. "They never did before." Sophia hesitated. Then, "They would now." He turned to her, not angry, just tired. "Do you know what they did, Sophia? The day she collapsed, she was sitting there playing, asking for help between bars. Someone thought she was faking it to get tips. I know. She died on that floor, right there, under that skylight. It took the ambulance 27 minutes. Security never even called until a customer screamed." Sophia swallowed hard. "I was working that day, I remember." He blinked, startled. "I was 17, interning at the music store. I saw her perform once. Just once. I still remember the way she closed her eyes like the world disappeared when she played." Arthur's jaw clenched. "I've spent 15 years pretending I could forgive myself. But I wasn't just late, Sophia. I was cold. I chose a meeting, a deal. I thought I had more time. She'd waited for me and his voice caught. She died waiting." Sophia reached for his hand. "I think she forgave you before you even got there." Arthur turned away, his throat tight. And then, a sharp voice pierced the hum of the mall. "There he is. That's him, isn't it?" A woman in a blazer, too bright for the setting, marched toward them, flanked by a cameraman struggling to keep up. She held a tablet in one hand, showing a paused video with his face at the piano. "Mr. Beaumont?" she said breathlessly. "Channel 9 News? Are you here to address the rumors? Is it true you now own the mall?" Arthur didn't respond. The camera blinked red. She pushed forward, sensing blood. "Did you plan this stunt for publicity? Or is this part of a larger investment strategy?" Sophia stepped between them. "He's not making a statement." But it was too late. People began turning. Recognizing. A ripple spread like wind through wheat. Arthur stood slowly. He didn't raise his voice, didn't gesture or ask for silence. But the crowd quieted, because when a man carries that kind of grief in his eyes, people listen. "I didn't come for applause," he said softly. "I came for the music, for her music." The reporter opened her mouth, but no words came. Arthur stepped forward slowly, past the cameras, past the shoppers and skeptics, toward the piano again. It looked smaller now, dwarfed by the crowd, a relic surrounded by spectacle. He reached out and lifted the lid. The keys hadn't fixed themselves. The cracks were still there. Some notes were still dead. but the silence was aching for song. I bought this mall, he continued, his voice carrying more strength now, not to profit, not to rebrand it, but to remind it of who it ignored, of what it lost. He sat, and without warning he played, not the lullaby this time, something new. The first notes were unfamiliar, uncertain, searching. Then slowly, they bloomed into something rich and deep, a melody built not from perfection, but from pain and love and memory, a song that carried the echo of Eleanor Beaumont's last day and her son's first steps toward healing. This wasn't a performance, it was a requiem. And the mall, no longer a place of shopping bags and forgotten jingles, became a cathedral. People wept. One by one they came forward. An old man from the bakery whispered, "She used to sing to my daughter every Saturday." A former security guard stood off to the side, shame lining every wrinkle in his face. He removed his hat, held it over his chest, and among them, a woman no one had noticed before, tall, elegant, eyes distant, stepped forward with a folder in her hands. She opened it slowly. Inside, original sheet music, handwritten. Arthur froze. He stopped playing, his breath caught. He recognized that handwriting. The woman spoke softly. "She gave me this 10 days before she died. Said it was for you, that you'd come back one day." Arthur took the folder with trembling hands. He unfolded the paper. It was titled, "The Return." He couldn't speak. He could barely breathe. Tears spilled, shameless, as he rested the pages on the piano, and for the first time in 15 years began to play what his mother had written for him, a melody he had never heard, yet somehow always known. It was the sound of forgiveness, of love carried across time, of a goodbye that was finally allowed to land. The notes climbed high, then dipped low. They stumbled in places, just like his hands, but no one noticed, because every sound was truth, every chord, a confession. When it ended, no one moved. Even the reporter wiped her eyes. Arthur stood. "This piano stays," he said, "not as a relic, but as a promise. And starting next month, every child in the city who dreams of music will have a place to learn, for free, in her name." The plaque was unveiled the next morning. "In memory of Eleanor Beaumont, may every broken T be heard." The next morning, the piano gleamed beneath the skylight like it had never been broken at all. Technicians had worked through the night, not to polish it into something unrecognizable, but to restore it, carefully, reverently. The chipped keys had been reset, the wood refinished but not replaced. They left the small nick on the edge of the bench, the one Arthur had made as a boy when he jumped up to surprise his mother during her playing. They left the faint scratch marks where her bracelets had tapped the lid. They didn't fix the piano. They honored it. And the city responded. The mall, once a place of distracted errands and hurried weekends, had transformed overnight into something quieter, softer. People no longer passed by the piano without glancing. They lingered. Some left flowers, some left drawings, some brought sheet music and dared to play. They played for lost mothers, for silent fathers, for forgotten dreams. They played because it wasn't perfect. And in the middle of it all, Arthur walked with his hood down now, his hands no longer stuffed in his pockets but open to what might come next. He didn't make statements to the press, he didn't hold court, but word of what he'd done, the restoration of the piano, the scholarship fund, the music centers, had already spread through the city like a spark catching on dry grass. Schools began contacting his new foundation. Music teachers reached out with trembling hope. Parents wrote letters that began with, "I didn't think anyone cared about kids like mine." Sophia stood by his side through all of it, not as an assistant, not as a publicist, but as someone who had once carried guilt of her own and chose to stay. Yet even amidst all the healing, a shadow lingered, because not everyone saw beauty in Arthur's return. From the far side of the city, behind an office with frosted windows and old security footage locked in a file room, one man watched the story unfold with tight lips and a pulse rising like a drumbeat beneath his collar. Harold Elkins, head of mall security, then and now. He hadn't been there that day when Eleanor collapsed. But he was the one who trained the guards. He was the one who signed the report that claimed she was non-responsive and possibly intoxicated. He was the one who refused to release the footage when Arthur requested it years ago. He had buried the truth. And now, the truth was clawing its way back. Arthur stood at the fountain again, watching a little boy plunk clumsy fingers across the keys, the child's mother nodding encouragement beside him. His eyes softened. He stepped forward and knelt beside the boy, whispering something private and kind. The boy smiled. Arthur tapped out a few notes to guide him. A small, beautiful harmony bloomed in the still air. That was when the voice came. Cold. Calculated. Well, if it isn't the prodigal son. Arthur rose slowly, turning. Harold Elkins stood behind him in a pressed navy blue blazer, his hands tucked in his pockets, his stance just a hair too confident for the moment. His badge wasn't visible, but his air of control had returned, like armor. Arthur's face didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes stirred. "Harold," he said evenly. "Didn't expect to see you back here," Harold said, glancing around at the crowd gathering again. "And certainly not like this." Arthur studied him. "I could say the same. I heard you bought the place. Must be nice, rewriting history with a few zeros." Arthur didn't rise to the bait. "No one's rewriting anything. I'm just playing what was always there." Harold's jaw clenched. There was silence between them, but it wasn't empty. It was heavy with things unsaid. "I know why you're here," Harold finally said. "You want to embarrass me, turn me into some scapegoat, but you don't know what it was like running this place. You weren't here. You didn't see what we dealt with." "I was here," Arthur replied quietly. "I saw exactly what mattered." A small crowd was forming. They didn't know who Harold was, not yet. But the shift in the air was palpable, an old tension surfacing like something buried beneath ice. Harold's voice dropped to a growl. "This whole piano circus, it's a stunt. You think a song and a speech erase what happened? That woman, she had a heart condition. There's nothing you could have done." Arthur's voice, when it came, was low, measured. "I didn't come here for revenge, but I am rebuilding the things your silence helped destroy." Harold scoffed. "Oh, please, you think you're some saint now?" "I think I'm trying," Arthur said, "which is more than I can say for the man who buried the emergency call log to protect his quarterly review." That struck. Harold's composure cracked. "You're bluffing." Arthur pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it out. "Here's a copy. I found it in the legal archives, misfiled. You signed off on it 3 days after my mother died. Redacted timestamps, changed language, your signature. You buried the delay." The crowd was growing. Murmurs began. Someone raised their phone to record. Harold's face turned gray. Arthur stepped closer, not to threaten, but to be heard. "I don't want your job. I don't want your apology. I want your silence to end. That's all." Then he walked away. Just like that. Back to the piano, back to the crowd, back to the music. Harold remained frozen, his future unraveling as strangers whispered his name into their phones, and the truth, so long suffocated under convenience, finally began to breathe again. By the time Arthur sat at the piano once more, the air had changed. He didn't need to explain. He simply played. This time it wasn't sorrow. It wasn't a lullaby. It was a song of rising, strong, bold, alive. The kind of song that made children sit up straighter and elders close their eyes with hands pressed to hearts. A song that didn't beg to be understood, but demanded to be felt. When it ended, a hush lingered. Then a little boy clapped. Then a woman. Then the whole mall stood. Not just in ovation, in remembrance, in witness. To a man who returned not with wealth, but with will. To restore what should never have been broken. And to sing for the voices that had been silenced. It started with the piano, but it didn't end there. The mall's fountain no longer murmured to the indifferent. It now served as a meeting place, of strangers drawn not by sale signs, but by stories. Elderly couples who hadn't visited the plaza in years returned with folding chairs and thermoses. Children who had never touched an instrument came dragging parents by the hand just to see the magic piano. There was no more need for ropes or guards around it. Respect had replaced regulation. And Arthur watched it unfold from the margins, not as a figurehead or celebrity, but as something simpler. A man paying penance through music. Sophia stood with him most days, her presence a quiet anchor. She had become something between a guide and a guardian, one who knew when to speak and when not to. They'd often sit on the same wooden bench near the pastry stand, watching child after child approach the piano like it might answer their most secret hope. One afternoon, a boy with autism, guided gently by his older sister, placed his fingers on the keys. He didn't look up, didn't speak, just played a few uneven notes. The song was fragmented but honest, raw. Arthur watched, misty-eyed as the boy's sister smiled through tears. "Where did he learn that?" someone whispered. "He didn't," the sister said. "He just heard it." That evening, Arthur added another clause to his foundation. Inclusive music therapy for children with neurodivergence, funded for life. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A woman in a navy coat arrived before sunrise, cradling a violin case like it was her firstborn. Her shoes were worn, her expression guarded. But when she began to play, right there beside the piano bench, the first notes cracked the air like ice melting at the end of winter. She didn't ask permission. No one did anymore. By the end of the week, cellists joined, then a clarinetist, then a street singer whose voice trembled through the mall corridors like something ancient and pure. Each one played not for applause but for connection, for memory, for something they couldn't say aloud. A new tradition bloomed. Every evening at 6 p.m., the piano rang out, not by Arthur's hands, but by anyone who dared sit down. Music drifted across the polished floor tiles like incense, softening corners that had once felt corporate and cold. People began arriving early just to sit and listen. They brought stories, they brought names, they brought grief and joy and longings they hadn't spoken in years. One night, a middle-aged man approached Arthur with a trembling jaw. "My daughter used to come here to play the piano, before it was closed, said it was the only time she felt heard. She died 3 years ago. Suicide." Arthur took his hand. No words, just a hand pressed to his shoulder, a moment of shared silence where tears meant more than language ever could. The city noticed, not just online, but in heartbeats, in traffic that slowed around the mall entrance as though approaching something sacred, in conversations that once centered on politics or the weather, now veering toward music, toward memory, toward what it meant to truly see one another. One by one, other malls called Arthur's foundation. "Would you consider installing a public piano here? We've got an abandoned corner no one uses. Could it be a place for song?" Some offered names of local musicians. Others sent video clips of children playing Chopin in Walmart aisles or humming Vivaldi in laundromats. It became clear people weren't hungry for entertainment. They were starving for belonging. And yet, even as warmth bloomed across the city, Arthur could not fully rest. He had repaired the mall. He had honored his mother. But something deeper still pressed against his ribs. Something unresolved, waiting in the silence behind the applause. One night, long after the last child had left and the floors had been polished clean, Arthur sat alone at the piano. No cameras, no curious eyes, just him and her. He opened the lid. The room was hushed except for the faint buzzing of fluorescent lights and the ghost sound of a music box from a toy store window nearby. He pulled out the sheet music, the return, and placed it on the stand. But he didn't play. He stared at it, hands trembling, because beneath the title was a note, scribbled in hurried, looping cursive, for Arthur. "When the silence ends, begin again." He pressed his palms to his eyes. He hadn't cried in days. Not since the plaque had been mounted. Not since that little boy whispered, "You made the piano, remember?" But now, the dam broke. He wept, not from guilt, but from the overwhelming grace of being allowed to grieve. After 15 years of swallowing emotion behind billion-dollar deals and stone-faced boardrooms, he finally felt it, fully, without shame. He reached for the keys and began to play, not the written notes, not the lines his mother had penned, but the space between them. A slow, searching improvisation. Melodies wandered, memories answered, and just then, a voice broke the air. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." He turned. It was Sophia. She stepped forward and sat beside him, close but not crowding. She didn't play. She didn't speak again. She just was, present and still. And in that moment, Arthur understood. This journey wasn't about reclaiming a mall or confronting old wrongs. It was about learning that healing isn't something you do in silence. It's something you share. He turned to her, his voice hoarse. "I want to build something more." She tilted her head. "More than what you've already done?" He nodded. "I want to create a space, not just a piano or a program. A real place where people come not to escape their pain but to play through it, to listen, to be heard. No fees, no red tape, just open doors, music, and mercy." Sophia smiled softly. "Then let's build it." And just like that, the seed of something far greater than a performance was planted. It would take months to plan, years to grow, but it had already begun. The music had not only returned, it had found its voice again. The blueprints came first, not on tablets or in corporate emails, but sketched in pencil on a napkin at a cafe table beside the piano, with Sophia watching him draw as the sun slanted golden through the skylight above. His hands moved slowly, carefully, like every line was sacred. And in a way, it was. "What do you want it to feel like?" she asked gently, her fingers wrapped around a cup of chamomile tea. Arthur looked up. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, with quiet certainty, "Like my mother's voice," Sophia blinked. "Not her music?" He shook his head. "Her voice. That sound she made when she said my name like it mattered more than anything in the world. I want people to walk into this place and feel that." The napkin sketch would soon become the heartbeat of something extraordinary. The Eleanor House for Music and Memory, a sanctuary carved out from glass, wood, and open air. No gates, no velvet ropes, just a space where people came not to perform, but to heal. It would be part conservatory, part community haven, part memorial, and above all, it would be free. Construction began weeks later on a donated plot just outside the city, land Arthur had once purchased on a whim during the height of his empire-building years, never knowing it would become the most important thing he would ever give. The team assembled around him was a tapestry of the lives he'd touched since his return. Children who had played the piano without ever learning a note, volunteers from the mall who had left their retail jobs to help, and strangers who had simply stood in the crowd that day and never walked away. And among them was a woman in a sea-green dress with silvering braids, standing near the edge of the site on the first day of the groundbreaking, clutching something wrapped in velvet. Arthur saw her from a distance. Something about her presence pulled at him, like a note just out of reach on the keys. He approached. She looked up, and her eyes filled instantly with tears. "You're him," she whispered. "Eleanor's boy." He nodded, unsure whether to smile or brace himself. She reached for his hand, not to shake it, but to place the velvet-wrapped bundle in his palm. "I've carried this for 15 years, she said. "Your mother gave it to me, said it was too important to stay in her house, told me it belonged to the future." Arthur unwrapped it slowly. It was a journal, his mother's. He turned to the first page, and the moment his eyes landed on her writing, looped, tender, full of grace, his knees nearly buckled. The woman steadied him. "She told me you'd come back one day, and that when you did, the world would change." Arthur opened to the center of the book. Notes danced between pages like petals caught in wind. Phrases, lyrics, half-written lullabies, and little drawings of piano keys and stars. But one entry, written in darker ink, stopped his breath. "If music can return to broken keys, then love can return to broken hearts. And one day my son will build something that sings not for praise, but for peace." He closed the book, pressing it gently against his chest. "Who are you?" he asked softly. The woman smiled, though her eyes were wet. "Her best friend, her first duet partner. My name's Marion." Sophia joined them quietly, having watched from a few steps away. Marion turned to her with knowing warmth. "You're the one who stayed," she said. "Eleanor would have loved you." They stood like that in the late afternoon light, the three of them, as construction noise faded into the background and the sky painted itself in soft oranges and pinks. Somewhere in the distance, a boy practiced violin beneath a maple tree. His notes were uneven, tender. Arthur turned to Marion. "Would you help us?" he asked. "Teach, lead, build." She didn't hesitate. "I've been waiting to finish the duet," she started. And just like that, another piece of Eleanor's spirit returned to the world, woven back through melody, memory, and mission. As the weeks passed, the Eleanor House rose from earth with a rhythm all its own. It didn't follow modern design trends. It followed music. Rooms were curved like clefts, windows placed to catch the sound of breeze as it touched the piano. The walls weren't plastered with plaques. They were covered in names, hand-painted by students and elders alike, each one tied to a story, a memory, a moment someone had once thought was too small to matter. And in the center of it all, beneath a ceiling shaped like an open palm, stood the original mall piano. Restored, not replaced. Its keys still bore the scars of time, but now they gleamed with dignity. A small inscription was added to the lid, just above the middle C. "You are not broken, you are becoming." One afternoon, as the building neared completion, Sophia found Arthur alone in the rehearsal room. He was reading his mother's journal again, but this time something flickered behind his eyes. Hope laced with grief, resolve laced with wonder. "She wrote about this place before I ever imagined it," he said, voice hushed. "She dreamed it into being." Sophia smiled. "And you answered." He turned to her, slowly closing the journal. "I don't know what to do next. This feels like the end of something, but also like the beginning of something I don't know how to name." Sophia stepped closer. "Maybe that's the point," she said. "Maybe music doesn't finish, it just echoes." He breathed in deeply and smiled. Not the tight, practiced smile of a CEO, not the distant nod of a man who had learned to hide, but a real one. And then, without ceremony, he walked to the piano, sat down, and began to play. It was not a melody he recognized, nor one he could name, but it came through his hands like wind through trees, familiar, comforting, wild. Sophia sat beside him. Marian leaned in from the doorway. Workers outside paused to listen. Even the city's traffic seemed to hush for a breath. The walls of Eleanor House had not yet heard their first concert. But in that moment they learned what they were made for. Not applause, not grandeur, but grace. The invitation was simple. No embossed letters, no gilded borders, just a soft white card with 4 words, "You are welcome here." Arthur had personally handwritten over 50 of them, each one addressed to someone who had once played a role in his life. However painful, however distant. He didn't send them out of obligation. He sent them because he believed in bridges now, not walls. He believed in the way silence could become music again, if given enough grace. The opening of Eleanor House was just a week away. Workers painted trim in soft blues and ivory whites. A mosaic was being laid beneath the entrance archway, each tile submitted by a different child who had sat at the mall piano in the month since his first return. Sophia supervised with gentle eyes, her hands always full, of messages, of plans, of kindness. Marian wandered the halls in the early morning hours, humming pieces Eleanor had once composed in the soft space between sleep and dawn. She said it kept the walls tender. And Arthur? He stood in the performance room at twilight every evening and let the emptiness sing to him before the crowds came. There was a reverence and stillness that he no longer feared. He welcomed it now. But as the building settled into purpose, the past did not stay silent. It came in through the front doors on a warm Thursday afternoon, dressed in a sleek black suit and a look of apology stitched behind practiced charm. "Arthur." Arthur froze. The voice had aged, but not enough to forget. He turned, and there stood his former business partner, Julian Reed. Once they had built empires together, stock lines, properties, investments with clean paperwork and messy human consequences. Julian had been the smoother of the two, the face for photos, the voice on panels. Arthur had always been the quiet one, the numbers man, the ghost in designer clothes. But after Eleanor died, Arthur had vanished, and Julian had not searched. Now, here he was, standing in a place made not for profits but for people. Julian looked around, visibly moved despite himself. "It's stunning." Arthur said nothing at first. He simply nodded toward a bench. Julian followed him there, folding his tall frame onto the seat like someone not sure he was allowed to sit. "I saw the story online," Julian began. "The piano, the mall. I didn't believe it was you, not at first." Arthur folded his hands in his lap. His voice was quiet. "You didn't call." Julian winced. "I didn't know how." "No," Arthur said. "You didn't want to." Julian swallowed. "That's fair." They sat in the pause. Then Julian exhaled. "Do you hate me?" Arthur looked at him, eyes clear. "No," he said. "I grieved you. That's not the same." Julian's shoulders slumped. He pulled something from his jacket pocket. A small photograph. Faded. It was of Arthur, years younger. Arms slung around Julian and Eleanor on the front steps of a music academy they'd sponsored together. All 3 smiling. All 3 unaware of what time would steal. "She believed in you more than anyone I've ever met," Julian said, handing him the photo. "Even when I didn't. Especially when I didn't." Arthur took it, his fingers brushing the image like it might dissolve. "I lost her," he said, "and I lost myself. But what I regret most is not trying to bring any of it back until now." Julian nodded slowly. "I'm not here for money or redemption. I know I can't erase the past. I just wanted to look you in the eye and tell you I was wrong." Arthur didn't answer right away. Then, he reached into his coat and handed Julian a card. The invitation. Julian's breath caught. You'd let me be here? Arthur offered a small smile. You're already here. That evening, as the sun melted into the earth, another visitor arrived, unannounced. An older man, weathered hands, military jacket, though he walked with a cane and a limp that spoke of wars long buried beneath silence. He said nothing at first. He stood in the garden where wind chimes made music of the breeze and children's laughter echoed faintly from the next room. Arthur spotted him from the far walkway and approached slowly. The man turned, and for a moment, both stopped, because the face was familiar. Not from boardrooms or family photos, but from that day, the day Eleanor died. You were there, Arthur said, his voice catching. The man nodded. I was the one who finally called the ambulance. I was on my break. I shouldn't have even been inside. Arthur's breath faltered. I recognized her, the man continued, his voice hoarse. She used to play at the VA hospital. For the wounded, for the forgotten. I had lost a leg. I was losing my mind. She sang to me like I was her own son. Tears slipped silently down the man's weathered cheeks. I never got to tell you. I always wanted to. I was ashamed. But she mattered, and she mattered to me. Arthur stepped forward and embraced him. The man wept against his shoulder. It was not a heroic reunion. It was something gentler, a forgiveness long delayed, finally arriving. By nightfall, the invitations had turned into arrivals. A woman who once mocked Eleanor now brought her own granddaughter to play in the music room. A former mall employee who had stood by in silence came with a letter he read aloud at the courtyard, ending with, I will no longer be a bystander to pain. Each person who arrived carried a thread of Eleanor's past, and Arthur wove them into the future like notes in a symphony. And through it all, the piano waited, not for spectacle, but for hearts ready to speak. One final guest came just as the lights dimmed, a woman with gray hair and trembling hands. She wore a brooch shaped like a treble clef. Arthur recognized it instantly. It had belonged to his mother. The woman stepped forward and placed it in his palm. She gave this to me when she thought she might never see you again, the woman whispered. She said, give this back to him only when he's found his way to music again, not just through it. Arthur clutched it tight. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Because tomorrow, the doors would open, and everything would begin again. The morning unfolded like breath after a prayer. Sunlight filtered through the copper-streaked clouds, bathing the front of Eleanor House in a warm, honeyed glow. A breeze stirred the magnolia blossoms lining the walkway, their petals falling like blessings along the stone path that led to the wide glass doors. On the tall, curved awning above the entrance, her name shimmered in delicate bronze script. Eleanor House for Music and Memory. There were no velvet ropes, no paparazzi, no flashing lights or red carpets. Instead, there was a choir of birds overhead and the low hum of anticipation in the hearts of the hundreds who had come, young and old, strangers and friends, all drawn together by something deeper than curiosity. They had not come to witness a man. They had come to remember a woman, and to hear, maybe for the first time, what healing sounded like. Arthur stood inside the entrance, one hand tucked inside his coat pocket where the treble clef brooch rested. He hadn't pinned it to his chest. That felt too much like performance. Instead, he kept it close to his heart, exactly where it belonged. Sophia joined him, her presence a balm. They're ready, she whispered. He looked at her with quiet gratitude. Are we? She smiled, as ready as music ever is. The main atrium stretched before them like a cathedral without pews. The floor-to-ceiling windows caught the light and threw it gently across the pale wood floor. At the center of the room, surrounded by a gentle ring of chairs, stood the piano, the original one, cleaned, repaired, lovingly preserved. It was not polished to perfection. The scars were still visible, each one a memory, each one a testament. And it was on that instrument that the first note of the day would be played. Arthur stepped forward, not to speak yet, but to listen. He paused just beside the piano and closed his eyes. He could almost feel her behind him, his mother, smiling the way she used to when she saw music waiting in something that others had cast aside. She had always believed broken things carried the richest songs. When he opened his eyes again, the chairs were full. Not just in the atrium, but out on the patio, down the corridor, even in the children's wing where young fingers fidgeted with ribbon-bound programs. It seemed the whole city had come, not to witness, but to belong. Arthur raised no microphone. His voice didn't need one. "Today isn't a performance," he said softly. "It's a promise." People leaned in. A promise that no child will ever be told they're too poor to play. That no melody will be lost because it came from the wrong neighborhood. That no memory is too painful to put into music. He rested a hand on the piano lid. "My mother played here. Not in this building, but in this city, and when she died unseen, unheard, I promised myself I'd never play again. That music had betrayed me." He paused. The silence was tender. "But I was wrong. I had betrayed her, because the gift she gave me was never meant to be buried. It was meant to be given." He opened the piano lid and sat down. The bench creaked familiar and warm. He took one breath. And then he began to play. It was not flashy, not rehearsed. It wasn't even precise. It was a conversation. One between grief and grace, between past and present, between a mother's lullaby and a son's redemption. The melody rose gently, like sunlight on calm water. Then deeper, richer, as if pulling memories from beneath the weight of years. People closed their eyes. Some wept, others smiled through their tears. One boy in the front row gripped his grandfather's hand and whispered, "It sounds like how I feel when I think of her." The music shifted, grew, and suddenly, from the far side of the atrium, another instrument joined in. A cello, low, resonant. Played by a teenage girl who had been practicing in secret for weeks, hoping, praying for the courage to join him on opening day. Arthur didn't look back. He didn't need to. He simply adjusted the tempo, creating space for her. Then came a flute. Then a second piano, played by a young boy whose hands trembled with nerves. Then a choir of humming voices, led by Marion in the back, their harmonies stitching themselves around the melody like a quilt around a shivering child. It was not a performance anymore. It was a homecoming. By the time the last note echoed into stillness, there was not a single dry eye in the atrium. Arthur stood. He didn't bow. He stepped down from the bench and walked through the crowd, not toward applause, but toward the door. Outside, people had begun laying flowers along the pathway. Not bouquets. Just one flower at a time, a daisy, a wild rose, a forget-me-not. As if each person brought a piece of something they'd lost and were offering it in return for the hope they'd found. One man stopped Arthur on the steps. He had white hair and a face carved with lines. His cane trembled. "I used to clean the floors at the mall," he said. "Your mother, she used to leave a sandwich for me on the bench every Thursday. I never said thank you. She just knew." Arthur took his hand. "You just did." A little girl tugged his sleeve next. She held out a drawing, crayons smudged with effort. It showed a piano, a bird, and a heart in the sky. "This is what it sounded like," she said. He knelt down. "It's perfect." As the day wore on, more came, not just to listen but to speak. Some brought letters, some brought songs. One elderly woman walked through every room and whispered her husband's name in each one. "He was a musician too," she said. "He never got the chance." But now others would. Sophia found Arthur later that evening in the garden behind the rehearsal hall. He was sitting on the grass, shoes off, eyes tilted toward the stars just starting to blink into view. She sat beside him, silent at first. Then she asked, "Do you think she knows?" Arthur didn't speak. But then, his lips moved. "I think she's been here all along." Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder, and for a while neither of them said a word. Because some music doesn't need notes, some love doesn't need proof, and some houses aren't built from wood and nails. They're built from forgiveness and longing, and the songs we dare to let the world hear even when our hearts are still mending. The world didn't change all at once. It never does. It changed softly, like the moment between a breath and a word, like the hush before the downbeat of a long-awaited song. It changed not through headlines, but through hearts. The story of Eleanor House, of the man who returned, the piano that sang again, and the melody no one could forget, began to spread. At first it was a whisper, then a spark, then a swell. One local reporter's video of opening day crossed 1 million views in 48 hours. Not because it was sensational, but because it was honest. A son playing his mother's music. A city holding its breath. A small boy joining him on a toy keyboard with 2 missing keys and the rhythm of a prayer. No one could scroll past it. There was something in the faces of the audience, ordinary people lit by something extraordinary, that made even the busiest stranger pause. National morning shows called, Talk show hosts asked for interviews. A news magazine titled their cover story, "The House Music Built." Arthur declined every camera, every spotlight. He told Sophia, "The music doesn't belong to me anymore. Let the story be hers." And yet the impact deepened. Letters arrived by the hundreds, then thousands, from single mothers teaching their daughters to play chopsticks on borrowed keyboards, from soldiers in overseas bases watching the video and remembering the lullabies they thought they'd forgotten, from children in shelters who drew pictures of pianos with wings, and one envelope came without a return address. Inside it was a single photograph, yellowed, folded neatly at the corners. It showed Eleanor, standing outside a church with a group of girls, all holding instruments. Her arm was around a child no older than 6, missing one shoe and wearing a dress 2 sizes too small. On the back, a note in uneven handwriting. "She taught me to believe in sound before I believed in myself. I am a composer now. Because of her." Arthur held the photo for a long time, his fingers trembling as he traced the curve of his mother's smile. That quiet, knowing expression that had never needed applause to feel real. She had planted seeds in hearts everywhere, and now, all across the world, they were blooming. But the moment that broke him came not in an interview or a tribute, but in a delivery. A modest, brown-papered package left at the front desk of Eleanor House one rainy evening, just as the last group of visitors were leaving. It bore no name, just one word: return. Sophia found it. She handed it to him wordlessly, sensing the weight inside. Arthur opened it with careful hands. Inside was a cassette tape, old, labeled in faded ink, "For my son, play when you're ready." His breath caught. He didn't even know she'd recorded her voice. He stared at it for minutes, hours maybe. The sun dipped behind the trees. The lights flickered on in the music rooms. Still, he sat there, holding it like a relic from a world that no longer existed. Sophia came to him just as the last light left the sky. "I can digitize it," she offered softly, "if you want." He nodded once. Later that night, in the listening room, an intentionally silent space built with thick walls and velvet-lined benches, they sat beside each other while the tape played. It crackled at first, then hummed. Then, her voice. "Arthur, if you're hearing this, I suppose I'm gone, or maybe you're just finally ready to let me speak again." Her laughter, faint, gentle, like wind chimes. "I never wanted music to be a weight on your back. I only ever wanted it to be your wings. I know I didn't say that enough. I know I played too much when you needed quiet, and I was quiet when you needed me to sing." Arthur leaned forward, eyes shut tight, chest rising with each word. "But the truth is, I always believed in your silence, because I knew what was inside it." A pause, the sound of her taking a breath. "I've watched you build walls around your grief, around your heart. But darling, grief doesn't need a fortress, it needs a door. So this is me, knocking." Another pause. A note from a piano, the exact tone he'd heard in the mall that first day he played again. "I've left you my journals, my songs, but what I leave you most is this: permission. To love again, to forgive, to feel joy without guilt, and to play, not for the world, not for legacy, not even for me, but for yourself." Silence followed, then one final whisper, so soft it almost vanished before it reached the room. "You were always my greatest symphony." Arthur bowed his head and wept. It was not a cathartic cry. It was quiet, steady, a tide finally reaching shore after years of holding back the sea. Sophia reached for his hand. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Because she had spoken, she had returned, not in body, but in song. The next morning, Arthur walked to the piano alone, not the restored one, a new one, placed in the garden. He sat as the sun broke over the hilltops and the air smelled of rain and something beginning. He placed his hands on the keys and played. It was not her song. It was not his. It was something new, something born from them both. And as the notes drifted upward into the trees, the leaves shimmered, not from wind, but from welcome. It was a late Sunday morning, weeks after the tape had played, and the leaves in the Eleanor House garden had begun their slow transformation, burning amber, gold, and crimson as autumn descended gently across the city. Arthur walked the grounds alone, breathing in the scent of change. He had always imagined the end of his journey would be loud, maybe triumphant, maybe dramatic. But as he watched a group of children chase each other across the lawn, their laughter spilling into the crisp air like scattered pearls, he understood something simpler, quieter. The greatest endings don't shout. They echo. He had received hundreds of invitations in recent weeks, universities offering honorary degrees, awards galas requesting appearances, even a letter from the governor's office suggesting a statewide Beaumont Music Day. He declined them all. He didn't need stages anymore. He had found his cathedral. It was here, in this small open sanctuary where sorrow had been composted into joy, where every broken chord found a home. That morning, as he passed through the atrium, he saw her again, the little girl with the drawing of the piano, bird and heart. She was standing just beside the old mall piano, her hand hovering over the keys, uncertain. Her dress was too big, and her shoes didn't match. But her eyes, they held that wide, trembling magic only children untouched by cynicism can carry. Arthur didn't interrupt. He watched. The girl glanced around as if asking permission from the air itself. Then, slowly, she sat. Her legs dangled from the bench, not even close to reaching the floor. She pressed one key, a middle C. It rang clean and alone. She waited. Then another. A broken chord, a stumble, a tiny flinch. But she didn't stop. Arthur stepped closer, silently, and sat on the bench beside her without a word. She glanced up, startled. "I can't play," she whispered. He smiled. "Neither can I." She looked confused. "But you're the one who made this place." He nodded. "I did, because I needed a place to remember how to try." She looked back at the keys. "I don't know where to start." He pointed to a chipped ivory one near her pinky. "That's where I started, with that exact key." She pressed it. A soft tone floated up and disappeared into the beams above. Arthur leaned in, resting his hands on his lap. "You don't have to know the whole song," he said. "Just the first note." She looked at him again, and this time her eyes softened. Her fingers returned to the keys. One note, then another. Wrong. She tried again. Right. Arthur didn't guide her. He simply listened. And within those few hesitant strokes of sound, a melody began to emerge. Not perfect, not polished, but hers. A teacher passed by in the hallway and paused. Sophia stepped through the garden door and saw them. Arthur and the girl, side by side, one remembering, the other discovering. She pressed her hand to her chest, tears rising, not from sadness, but awe. By the time the girl finished, Arthur was smiling. "Do you want to play again tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded, her whole face glowing. "Will you be here?" He hesitated, then gently shook his head. "No, but you will." She looked puzzled, and he placed a small folded envelope into her hand. Inside, a key. Not to the building, but to the piano's bench drawer, the one where Eleanor had kept her spare sheet music, now filled with beginner lessons, blank pages, and handwritten encouragement from the city's best teachers. "You're the first to have it," he said. "Why me?" Arthur looked out at the atrium, then back into her wide, waiting eyes. "Because you listened before you played." And with that, he stood. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition. He had played the note he was born to play, and it had found its echo. Later that week, Arthur packed a small bag. No suits, no planners, just a notebook, his mother's journal, and the photograph of her with the children outside the church. He left a letter for Sophia. In it he wrote, "There are places still waiting for music, places forgotten the way I once was. I'm going to find them, not to build houses, but to sit beside pianos and say, 'Start here. You are the guardian now, and the garden is growing.'" Sophia read it 3 times before smiling through her tears. And when she stepped into the atrium that morning, the little girl was already there, playing, off-key, off-rhythm, but radiant. Dozens of children soon followed. Some with violins, some with humming voices, some with nothing but their ears and their stories. The Eleanor House thrived, not because of wealth, not because of brilliance, but because a single man, broken by silence, had dared to sit at a broken piano and listen. And the world had listened back. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the keys that no longer work perfectly. Undercover Billionaire plays broken piano at mall. What happens next leaves everyone in tears is not just a story about redemption or legacy. It's about listening to the parts of ourselves we've silenced for too long. Arthur Beaumont, once a titan of industry, discovered that true power isn't in status or wealth, but in vulnerability, in giving voice to what hurts, and in building spaces where others can heal. From a forgotten piano in a noisy mall to a sanctuary for the unheard, this journey reminds us that the things we hide, our grief, our guilt, our brokenness, are not signs of weakness, but the very soil where meaning grows. Eleanor's message echoes beyond her music. That love, shared honestly, doesn't die. It transforms. The next time you pass by someone quiet or overlook something worn, ask yourself, what music might still live inside them? And when it's your turn to speak, to play, to build, start with the first note, even if it's imperfect, because sometimes the smallest sound becomes the song that saves us all.